So dating apps have had a recent surge in popularity, and by now over 100 million users a month use these apps to find new partners, find casual encounters, or other interpersonal relationships. If you don't know what a dating app looks like or how it works, you have two prevailing models. You have the card stack model used by apps like Tinder and Bumble, where you see one profile at a time. You have to like or dislike them, and if you like someone and that person likes you back, it's a match and you can start a conversation. Alternatively, apps like Grindr use a grid model, where you see multiple profiles at the same time, and you can freely start a conversation with anyone you see. We study these location-based dating apps because they elicit an interesting and peculiar privacy behavior. Users are very willingly sharing highly personal and highly sensitive data on these apps, including exact locations, because this enables the location-based aspect of showing users nearby. Users also expect that others are sharing data, not only to find better matches and better filter on the traits that they want to see, but also because prior work has shown that this increases their feelings of trust and safety, which is necessary because users are sharing their personal data with complete strangers. This is, of course, the goal of dating apps, to find new users, new people that you do not yet know. So there is a certain tension between sufficient self-disclosure of personal data, but at the same time, people do care about maintaining their own privacy. So we looked at what the privacy risks are in sharing this personal data on these apps with other users. And this is an important part of our threat model. We look at social privacy. So this is privacy towards other individuals on the platform. This is different from institutional privacy, where users want to remain private towards the platform, the company, maybe third parties, and so on. So in our threat model, our adversary focuses on collecting personal data about one or more other users of the app, so either a targeted data collection or just broad mass-scale data collection, and they only do so using client-side interactions as a regular user. So there's no infiltration of the servers of these apps. Instead, the adversary just pretends to be a regular user and collects personal data through this way. And they can do so for a variety of malicious intentions. Of course, with just having some personal data, you can exploit vulnerabilities such as social engineering or identity theft. But given the intimate context of online dating, you also see issues such as virtual stalking, blackmailing, and even with those locations, a transfer into the physical world with physical assault, physical stalking, and even some nation states prosecuting minorities who are present on these apps. So in our study, we looked at the extent of the exposure and leaks of personal data in location-based dating apps. We focused on the 15 most popular dating apps according to the Google Play Store, and we analyzed them across 3 dimensions of data. We have personal data, which is personally identifiable, attributes such as somebody's name, age, or current employer. We also look specifically at sensitive data based on the special categories in Article 9 of the European GDPR, attributes such as political opinions, religious beliefs, or health data. And finally, we also look at data related to the usage of the app or the dating process itself. This is not necessarily personally identifiable, but can still be sensitive. For example, when somebody was recently active, which a stalker might abuse in terms of harassing somebody for being on the app. We also analyze this data across 3 modes of exposure and leaks. First, we look at intended sharing. This is data that is readily visible or exposed in the user interface, so a user is aware that they are sharing this data because they see it for others. Nevertheless, this already reveals a lot of personal and sensitive data. Just from the small snippet of the screenshot on the slide, you know this person's name, age, pronouns, employer, and there's much more that will appear in these profiles. Next to this, we also analyze inadvertent sharing. This is data that is leaked, that is not shown in the UI, and that therefore violates a user's mental model of what they are sharing with other users. Here we distinguish 2 modes. One is a traffic leak, which is data that is automatically sent in the API responses between the app and the server. For example, on the slide, you see a bug we found in Tinder where if somebody set what they call custom gender, or in most cases a non-binary gender, that even though they have indicated that the gender should be hidden or not shown on the profile, it's still leaked in the API data that is sent to the client. We also looked at exfiltration leaks, which are leaks which are only enabled by altering the traffic, the API requests, or behavior, for example, issuing multiple requests. The example on the slide shows an issue in Bumble and Badoo, where the request contains the data fields you want to obtain from the servers, and they didn't do proper filtering, so it was even possible, for example, on Bumble, to exfiltrate the age and gender preferences of other users. Now, given the time limits, I'll also only cover a few highlights across those 15 apps. If you want to have a detailed breakdown of our analysis, I encourage you to read the full paper. We first look at the intended sharing. And already here we see broad differences between the apps in terms of the number of attributes that users can provide and that therefore can be shared with other users. Two interesting case studies are, on the one hand, Grindr, which has relatively few data fields, only 13, but some of them are very sensitive. They relate, for example, to somebody's HIV status or sexual preferences. However, this is actually seen as beneficial, especially within the main LGBTQ community that Grindr targets. And interestingly, all fields can be made optional, so a profile could be fully empty. But of course, here there's a risk of a stealthy adversary who just creates an empty profile and can collect data about everyone around them without being visible or exposed to other users. On Plenty of Fish, Hilly, and Badoo, certain fields that are optional in all the other apps are actually required, so they force people to share more personal data. However, even if data is left optional, the ability to provide it means that others might still expect that you disclose such data and assume the worst if you don't. So this still reduces agency for users to decide how much data they will be sharing. Next, in terms of the inadvertent sharing, we found that the APIs leak data for all the apps that we studied. In total, we found 99 leaks, mostly related to app usage data, so this dating process. But again, this can be sensitive data like when somebody was active or what preferences they have configured in the app. And otherwise, we also saw a lot of leaks of the gender and sexual orientation. Interestingly, all attempts at, or nearly all attempts at reciprocity failed. This is the case when an app only will show you certain data about other users if you have also shared that data or generally enough data on your profile. But most of these apps actually implement this filtering on the client side, so are actually still sending you this data even though you're not supposed to see it. And finally, 6 apps leak exact user locations, which then again enables these kind of attacks in the physical world. And they all do so through a concept called trilateration, where with 3 distances and 3 locations, you can pinpoint a user's exact location. The most novel/advanced attack that we found here is what we call a proximity oracle. And here we abuse the filtering mechanism of these apps. You can indicate that you only want to see users within a certain distance, and this is something that the adversary controls. So in this example, we set this filter to 2 kilometers, and then we query our oracle to see whether the user is still within this filter. So the attacker puts themselves near the victim, and they move themselves away in small increments until they no longer see the victim in their card stack. At this point, they know that they are exactly 2 kilometers away from the victim. They do so at the second location. Again, they obtain a distance of exactly 2 kilometers, and when you do this at the third location, the intersection or the place where all the circles cross, this is the place where the user is located. And this vulnerability was present in 4 out of the 6 apps. Luckily, by now, all of the apps have fixed their location leaks. In the paper, we also discuss how the lack of strict requirements in terms of account creation and the types of credentials you have to provide enables large-scale, long-term, and stealthy tracking. And we also looked at the privacy policies of these apps, where also from a legal side, these policies fall short in giving users control of what they are sharing on these apps. And that naturally leads into our recommendations. On the one hand, these apps should give users more control, choice, agency over what they are sharing with other users. They should avoid nudging users about sharing data. The screenshot on the right actually is from Hinge, where they encourage users to share more because they say that this will lead to better matches. Instead, users should be properly informed about sharing. They should be fully aware of what other users can see about them. And going one step further, these apps could consider hiding profile data by default. If you make showing certain attributes to others an opt in, it becomes a conscious decision, and people will be very intimately aware of what they are sharing. And specifically for location privacy, these apps could request the updates of locations explicitly. Ask the user whether it is safe to share their current location, and also maybe give the option to share an approximate location, the town, let's say, where they are currently located. From a technical side, of course, these apps should also better protect user data, fixing those leaks of APIs, making sure that whatever is in the API is only what is strictly necessary for the UI, and avoiding any unnecessary extra data. And in terms of location inferences, they should prevent both simple attacks like trilateration, but also more advanced probabilistic attacks, and implement solutions such as spatial cloaking or the rounding of coordinates to reduce the precision at which users are located within the app's data, and therefore making sure that it's impossible to exfiltrate a user's current location. And one more holistic solution of preventing any data leaks is just avoiding having this data in the first place, a concept called data minimization. Because even if your app is vulnerable and your API might leak additional data, if you do not have any data to leak, there's no way that there can be a privacy breach. And one interesting example here is Tinder, which actually has relatively few sensitive data fields. You cannot input your political beliefs or any health data, and it implements the spatial cloaking, so coordinates are rounded to about 1 kilometer, but it's still the most popular dating app in the world. So there does not need to be an explicit trade-off between functionality, popularity, and privacy. This leads to my conclusion. So we looked at location-based dating apps because they harbor this interesting sensitive privacy context. Users feel compelled to share data, but are still worried about their social privacy. So we looked at the extent of exposure and leaks of personal data. We already saw that the data exposure varies quite significantly between apps, and that all apps are vulnerable to some type of leaks or inferences of hidden data and locations, all enabled by leaky APIs. And in general, we saw also through the privacy policies that these apps put the burden of protecting their own privacy on the users themselves. And this highlights the need to not only look at those privacy policies, but also do detailed technical audits of the user interface and comparing it with the API to really obtain the full extent of privacy breaches and enable us to better protect users' privacy on dating apps. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions.